You're listening to the Mommy Labor Nurse Podcast, episode number 41. Hey guys, happy Monday. We're doing a birth story episode today. Not my birth story, but I wish. If you're listening to this episode, I hope I already had the baby, but I don't know. If you're listening to this episode and I'm still pregnant, then I would be 40 weeks and 3 days. But maybe I had the baby over the weekend. So who knows? We'll see. Anyway, we are doing a birth story today, guys, with my friend Samantha. She recorded with me a while back and has since had her fourth baby that she will reference in the episode that she's pregnant with. Samantha and I started talking about her background. She actually has a PhD in exposure science. Ooh, fun. So she has a lot of expertise on how medications and chemicals get passed from mom to baby, either during pregnancy or breastfeeding. So we started talking a little bit about that, and then we went into her birth stories, and she's had 4 now, but she had only had 3 at the time. So we talked about all of those. Her first one was an epidural. Her second one came super fast, didn't have any time for medication. And then her third one was also medication free. And then she referenced in her fourth one that she plans on going unmedicated as well with her fourth one, which she did end up doing. Something that she talks about in her episode that I thought was really cool, and I personally do myself, is mindfulness and meditation. And she used mindfulness and meditation through her third birth, and she planned on using it with her fourth, which she was able to do. So she talked a lot about that and just thought that was really cool. So a few months after we record this podcast, she did end up having her fourth baby. Once again, like I said, unmedicated. And this one she said was different because her labor stalled out, but the mindfulness and meditation that she used during her third birth and that she was very well versed in, once again, made a huge difference and, was able to get her through that fourth birth unmedicated. So without further ado, let's hear from Samantha.
You're listening to the Mommy Labor Nurse Podcast, where we firmly believe in the power of education when it comes to giving birth. Tune in each week as we dive into pregnancy-related topics, expert interviews, and a variety of birth stories. As a reminder, anything you hear on this podcast is not medical advice. Please see mommylabornurse.com/disclaimer for more details. And now, here's your host, educator, registered nurse, and fellow mom, Liesel Teen.
Hi, Samantha. Welcome to the Mommy Labor Nurse Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Can you start by telling listeners a little bit about yourself and your family, where you're from, what you're doing right now, all that good stuff?
Okay, I can do that. So, like you said, my name is Samantha, and I am originally from Georgia. I've been in Pennsylvania for about 5.5 years now. So I moved up here for a job. I'm actually teaching chemistry at a local university, although, at the end, so just in a couple weeks, I'll be done with that. I'm having my fourth child at the beginning of January. So I'll be done teaching and I'll be staying at home after that with everybody. So that'll be a new and different challenge.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. But with that, right now, I also have my own site called Evidence-Based Mommy.
Yeah.
I'm kind of combining my chemistry and not just chemistry. I kind of have a mixture of background in chemistry and public health. So looking at how the choices we make, like either in food or just things we get exposed to in the air and all that kind of stuff, how they affect us and how they affect our babies. Because our children get exposed, either while they're still in the womb or when we're breastfeeding or all of that. So that's kind of where I started with my expertise. But then, of course, like becoming a mother too made me a lot more interested in child development and in, emotional health and emotional intelligence and instilling that in our kids, because we didn't necessarily grow up with people, our parents explicitly trying to instill those things. So it's something that's really important to me. So I've kind of got all these different passions and interests related to parenting and motherhood at Evidence-Based Mommy.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, let's talk about that a little bit because I know the challenges it is. And we were just talking about it before we got started in like starting a new blog. What are some of, I guess, your most popular kind of articles, or what are some of the ones that you like kind of started with?
Well, I started more on my public health expertise, because that was the stuff like I have the degree in and I felt more comfortable with, but I've been expanding kind of based on experience, I've been doing yoga with a really great teacher for a few years. So kind of the mindfulness and mental health type stuff that goes with that too. My most popular post actually is about the 3 different births I've had and how different they were from each other, and what I plan to choose, here in just a month and a half or so, based on how those first 3 went.
Well, I was going to say, that's perfect because that's what we're going to talk in depth about today, guys. We're going to do some birth stories and talk about all 3 of your births, and then, what you can anticipate, hopefully, for your 4th one. So that's pretty cool. Well, I'll definitely link your all of your stuff in the show notes page, and we can remind listeners at the end where they can follow you and your website, if you have an Instagram, all of that good stuff. Well, cool. Well, let's go ahead, and this, is a good kind of, I guess, tie-in to kind of get started and talk about your birth story. So let's go way back and talk about your first one. First of all, I know you said you're pregnant, you're 8.5 months pregnant with this one. How kind of far apart, I guess we're going to eventually talk about that, but like how far apart are your kids? And let's go back to the very beginning and with your first of 4, getting pregnant, if you had any issues, all of that good stuff.
Okay. So my oldest is 6.5. I also have a 4.5-year-old, and my little boy will be 3 in January. So 6, 4, and 2, and then, this one on the way.
Yeah.
And let's see. Honestly, I was really fortunate. I didn't have trouble getting pregnant. In fact, it is great. Like, in fact, I was an only child. I wasn't around kids or babies much when I was growing up. I was a little weird with them. I didn't really want kids. My husband wanted kids. And so I got off of birth control for a few months because I was like, we'll time it so that if I get pregnant, I would have a baby in the summer. Because, I was just starting that teaching career.
Right.
And I thought to myself, I was like, odds are there's no way I'll get pregnant in that time frame. So I'm going to like buy myself a year. But lo and behold, I did.
That's all that is, I feel like.
I know. And so everything went well. I was sick, but everything went well.
Yeah.
And even, right before she was born, I was like, I can't do this. I don't even like babies. You don't understand. And the nurse just like looked at me and said, I'm going to give you a minute, and just turned around and walked out. And then, of course, I had my oldest and I fell in love with her, and now I'm on my way to having 3 more besides her. So
yeah, no, that's great. And I think it's so funny too, because, I feel like I've always kind of like kids, like I babysat when I was younger, and I always envisioned myself like being a mom and stuff. But I know a lot of people don't, and who are like you, who just, either think that they're not going to have kids, or they're very like, oh, I think I want to have kids, but like, I don't really like other people's kids.
Right.
But it's so different when it's your own baby. Like it is so different.
But at the same time, now I like other people's, babies and toddlers and stuff. But I was the person, whenever you're like early, mid-20s, people just assume if there's a baby, you want to hold it.
Yeah.
Because like, of course, you're going to like babies, right? And so they hand you the baby, and like anytime someone would hand me a baby, he or she would start crying. And I'd be like, what do I do with this thing? and just like hope someone would please take it back, So that was me. So it's been a very big change. So.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's talk about how that first birth kind of went, because it was very different from, I know all of your 3 were very, very different, but this one was very different, from any of them. So yeah, how did that first one go?
Yeah, so it was kind of the traditional epidural. I've been fortunate. I've had fairly short labors with all of them.
Yeah.
My first one was only 9 hours, which especially for a first.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was, I labored at home for a while, like in the middle of the night, and then made it to the hospital around probably 5:30 a.m., I guess, and had my epidural. And, as I mentioned, like I wasn't able to sense when it was time to push because the nurse told me it was time to push. And that was when I started freaking out and saying I couldn't have a baby. And
yeah.
And it went well, but the recovery afterwards was not awesome. First of all, that first time that I had to get up to go to the restroom, my blood pressure just tanked.
Oh.
And I just had this awful, awful nausea for like 20 minutes or something. And I was like, I don't even care that I have a baby. Like, I just feel like I'm dying, and it was especially after being sick the whole way through pregnancy. I was just mad to be nauseated again. And then on top of that, the woman who delivered, gave me an episiotomy in the middle of it and didn't tell anyone. She just kind of like did it.
Yeah. That's not cool.
That was not cool. And so that was like 5 or 6 months of recovering from that.
Jeez.
Yeah. So like the process itself was, fine, but the recovery afterwards was much harder.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, especially with an episiotomy that you didn't consent to.
Right. I'm like, are they allowed to do that? But
they're not supposed to. I mean, you're really definitely not supposed to. I mean, it really anything that happens during your birth in terms of like a procedure kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or anytime, I mean, I just saw a post, I can't remember who did it, but it was talking about like, it's not even really okay to be like, I'm going to put my hand, you're going to feel my hand now. It's really more appropriate to say, hey, is it okay if I put my hand here? Or, hey, is that, in terms of like a cervical check or something, because that's a lot of times what I'll do is I'll say, hey, during a cervical check, I'm like, okay, you're going to feel my hand, my glove, like against your thigh. And then we do a cervical check. But yeah, it's really actually more appropriate to say like, okay, can I put my hand here? Okay. Yes, that's consent. It's anything like that really, consent is a big thing. I think that we're just continuing to work on as a whole here.
Well, and then the other interesting thing, now that you mentioned that, so it was, I'm going to guess like 11 to 11:30, somewhere in there, because she was born around 12:30. Then a nurse came in and she told me that she was going to do a cervical check so that they could start Pitocin. And I'm like, even I, who hadn't gotten really deep into, any kind of natural birth stuff at that time, knew that like, but why? I haven't been in labor like that long compared to, the horror stories that you hear.
Right.
And it just so happened that she checked and she's like, oh, you're fully dilated. We don't have to do that. Let me go get the midwife. So yeah, there was not a lot of consent sought, which is interesting because that was actually a midwife delivering me. I don't know if it's because it was 6 years ago or if because it was, down in a rural part of Georgia. Like, I'm not really sure what the deal was, but looking back, there were things about it that, I didn't care for.
Yeah, you weren't cool with.
Right. Or like I didn't realize, that a lot of places they'll basically throw the baby on top of you just as soon as he or she is born for skin-to-skin contact. Like they didn't do that. They immediately took her and cleaned her up and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that you brought up that it was a midwife taking care of you, because I talk about this all the time, that it's not, I think a big kind of misconception that people think is that, oh, if I get a midwife versus an OB, my experience is going to be a lot better. It's going to be a lot more natural. And it really is, that is so far from the truth. I'm not, bashing midwives. Like there are some amazing midwives that I've worked with, but it really so much depends on your provider, regardless. The individual, because there are some, bad, not so great midwives, and there are some not so great OBs. So it's really midwife versus OB does not have, male, female does not have anything to do with it. So I'm glad that you brought that up. So, well, that kind of moves us into, your next pregnancy, your next birth. Let's talk. So I guess you said your oldest one is 6.5 and then your middle one is 4. So that wasn't
Mhm.
too, long in between. So let's talk about that pregnancy. And we will get right back into this week's episode after a quick break from this week's sponsor. This week, the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast is sponsored by Mommy Knows Best. And if you guys know me, I've been following and doing stuff with Mommy Knows Best for a long time. Mommy Knows Best empowers all moms with the tools and resources necessary to give your newborn the best start in life. From an assortment of delicious lactation cookies, my favorite, I've eaten way too many of them during this pregnancy, and I plan to eat way too many of them when I'm breastfeeding this baby. From an assortment of delicious lactation cookies to supplements and beyond, their products contain all natural herbal remedies traditionally and effectively used for generations to treat low milk supply. Whether you're a new mom or a pro, Mommy Knows Best gives you plenty of options, all of which are created with the health and safety of both baby and mom in mind. And I have tried a lot of different lactation stuff. Like when I was a breastfeeding mom with Walter, when I was breastfeeding him, I struggled with low supply. So I tried so many of these dang, lactation cookies and bars and all of this stuff. And I honestly think Mommy Knows Best. Their cookies and their flavors are the best ones that I've had. I mean, they just taste like normal cookies that you would bake in the oven or you would, buy from the store. Like there's nothing weird about them. They just taste like delicious cookies. So they recently sent me a couple different mixes, which I made one of them before this baby came last week. It was the peanut butter candy brownies, and they're already gone in my house because they've gotten eaten up. And then the other new flavor that they sent me was the salted caramel brownies, which I'm going to plan on making those after the baby comes so I can enjoy those when I'm actually breastfeeding. So if you are interested in snagging any of these new brownie mixes or any of their other products, they have a lot of different delicious flavors. You can head over to my link at mommylabornurse.com/cookies. And that will take you to the Mommy Knows Best website where they have all of their different flavors. And if you use the code LABORNURSE10, that's LABORNURSE 10, you can save 10% on any order. And that code works on their website and it also works on their Amazon store if you purchase anything of theirs from Amazon. All right, let's get back into this week's episode.
Yeah, so they're 23 months apart. The second one we had, like I said, we moved up to Pennsylvania. We moved up here the week after my oldest turned a year old.
Mm-hmm.
And so we didn't really know people yet. We were pretty isolated. Like looking back now, I realized just how isolated I was and just how much that contributed to, postpartum anxiety and all that kind of stuff. But of course, that's getting ahead of, you have to have the baby before you have postpartum anxiety. So,
well, you can have prenatal anxiety. That's
true too. That's a good point. But anyway, so again, the pregnancy went well. I was sick, trying to deal with being sick while also having a toddler to take care of was
so difficult. Yes.
So difficult, but we made it through. And with her, like, I was kind of one of those on the fence, like it would be nice to have a natural birth, but like I didn't actively do anything to try to prepare for it.
Yeah.
It works out. I think just like a day or two before she came, I did a lot of reading. Like I was just Googling and reading birth stories, and I read a bunch of natural birth stories. So at least I had an idea of how that worked. But
yeah,
I hadn't done any kind of like mindfulness or meditation or anything to kind of help you cope.
Yeah.
And so I was still nursing my oldest at the time. And I woke up at about 6 a.m. and I let her nurse. And I'd been kind of just like letting her nurse as long as I could stand the Braxton Hicks contractions for a few weeks. But it turned out that particular morning, they were not Braxton Hicks. They were actual real contractions. And yeah, but when you let your child breastfeed while you're in labor, it really ramps up the process.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Nipple stimulation.
Yeah. And so, we realized it was the real deal. I remember my husband got a really quick shower I remember slicing up strawberries for my toddler for breakfast, like in between contractions. And we got her dropped off to daycare and got to the hospital. And so, my next daughter was born 45 minutes after we hit the hospital door.
Ooh, girl.
Yeah. So
Not
we got
too long
there.
at all.
No, and we got there, and like I said, everything was very intense because I had been nursing before that. And so, I was like, yes, give me that epidural. And
yeah, I'm sure.
I was, but then like there really wasn't time. Like the anesthesiologist was trying, but I was like, I didn't realize at the time, but I was in the middle of transition while he was trying to get a needle in, which does not work well because there's a lot of like writhing and,
yes,
not being able to be still. And I was panicking because like I was yelling, I was like, this has to work. The epidural has to work, and freaking out. But it didn't work, and then I started yelling that I needed to push, and the baby came. And like afterwards, it was great. And I felt much more with it. And she was able to nurse within like 10 minutes of being born. Maybe not even.
That's
10
great.
minutes. Yeah. So getting her started was easier than it was with my first one. And it was just after I got through it, I was like, oh, that was the worst it got. And a lot of the pain I felt, I think, was really more attributable to panic than to like actual pain. You know what I mean? And so I was glad with the experience overall. So whenever I got pregnant with my third one, which we found out that I was pregnant with him like the day after we had my second one's birthday party. So
nice.
They're only 19 months apart. But I decided, you know what, I'm going to actually prepare for a non-medicated birth because like I've done it and I know I can. So I would like to actually do it on purpose because recovery was so much easier.
I had one question while you're talking. Was this the same practitioner, or was it a different practice, or was it a different hospital? What was it like?
I'd gone from Georgia to Pennsylvania. So this was,
that's right. So to completely different place. Gotcha. Yeah. And I think that's so great that you brought up, not great for you at the time, but great that you brought up the whole fear factor in your pain, because that is something that I talk about in my course, in my birth courses, is the fear, especially my natural course, is the fear. And I think a lot of typical birth classes don't really like address that, hey, like fear is, it fuels pain. I mean, I really believe it fuels pain, and
it does. Biochemically.
Yes.
It does.
Yes, absolutely. So if you can address the fear and what you're actually afraid of, to the bottom of that, because sometimes it's just, we're just afraid of, we don't know, we don't know what we're afraid of. We're just afraid. It's like, okay, if you can really sit here, analyze what exactly you're afraid of. Is it because you're afraid of hospitals, because you're afraid of delivering at a hospital? Is it because you're afraid of needles, or, getting an epidural? Is it pain or whatever? We can address that. And then it's like, okay, then we can do XYZ. Then we do pain management. If you're afraid of, contractions, or, maybe thinking about a different place to give birth. If you're afraid of the place, there's so many things. But yeah, I love that you brought up the fear factor in that, because it sounds like with your third birth, you recognized that there was this fear and you really did something about it. So let's go into your third birth and how that was different.
Okay. You mentioned a lot of labor classes not addressing that. And I would agree, because my first birth, I went to like the hospital labor class. Of course, this is the same place that the woman just like gave me the episiotomy without asking and all that.
Yeah.
That class like absolutely terrified me, because it was very clinical. These are the things that's going to happen to your cervix and to your body. And like, I won't even like mention some of the imagery in case there's any first time moms that hear it, because it was just like it was not helpful. And my husband said he looked around the room and he saw like all these women's reactions. He said that there was one woman who was just like sitting there gray. And I was sitting there with like silent tears streaming down my face. Like, it was not helpful. So actual helpful birthing courses are much better. And, and sometimes you can find them, resources like you said, your own class.
Yeah. And there's a lot of places, community classes that you can go to that are high quality. I'm not bashing, every other course out there, but that's a great example of like, hey, I went to this community class, hospital offered class, and it was just crazy.
Yeah, it was not good.
So I think it's good. I think it's also important. This is what I say in my courses too. It's like, hey, this might not be your only resource. Like, hey, like take this and read this book and, go here or whatever. So but you're right. There can be definitely some fear mongering kind of tactics that some birth classes go through. I'm just thinking of like sitting in a high school class and like watching birth videos. Like I remember doing that as a teenager, and like that is what I envisioned some of like these birth classes to be like. It's just like you're all sitting in a classroom like freaking out, and that's not what we want to do. Like as birth professionals and as educators, like that's what I really want to just kind of like hold your hand and walk you through this and like
empower you,
do the warm fuzzies, like not sugarcoat stuff. Like I'm very clear about like, hey, this is what it is. Labor hurts a lot, but you don't have to be afraid of it. And this is what you can do. And yes, exactly. Empower people, not scare people. So, okay, sorry. My rant about everything. Let's keep talking about your third one.
Okay. So with the third one, like I said, I decided, I want to do an unmedicated birth this time. And so what do I need to prep for that? And so the first thing, actually, it was just kind of luck. I happened to meet, I talked to you earlier about my yoga instructor, and I just happened to meet her. There was like this community thing at the mall. I think I was volunteering with the La Leche League, maybe. And I walked by her, and she said that, she did prenatal yoga. So I started going there, and that was kind of the first step. And it was really helpful. Just using yoga allows you, I guess, kind of to separate yourself from something that's like stressing you out, for example. So even just like the example that I would use is my oldest was not the easiest to get to sleep when she was a baby and a toddler. And I'm saying that very lightly. And so I would try to rock her to sleep, and I would get so angry and so tense. Like my whole body would be tense. And like, just go to sleep. I just want to go to bed, Or actually, I just want to have like a little bit of space. And like every night it was, me getting angry. And of course that couldn't have helped her sleep. Like it didn't help either of us.
Right.
But with my second one, I was able to sit there and rock her, and I would notice, like I would think about my feet grounded on the floor, and I would feel like just kind of be mindful of like parts of my body moving up. I would be mindful of, as I was holding her, I could feel her little bottom in the crook of my elbow. I could feel her little head, in my other hand. And I would focus on that kind of thing. And those were just tools that I learned from yoga. It's not like anyone ever explicitly taught me to do that. And so having those tools of mindfulness, things that you can focus on, like you can still accept whatever it is that's stressing you or scaring you or whatever, but you can also focus elsewhere, was really helpful.
Absolutely. And I do that. I do some of those kind of grounding exercises. Like I haven't had a ton of anxiety attacks in my life, but I've had a few, and I just have longstanding anxiety. And sometimes I need to do those kind of physical things and just like a grounding exercise to kind of bring myself back. So that's really, really cool that you brought that up. And it sounds like is that kind of the stuff that you implemented during your labor?
It is. So I did that. And I read Hypnobirthing. Are you familiar?
Okay. Oh yeah.
So what I did was I got it and I read it like 4 times in a row. I kind of feel like that's where my nesting instinct was
Yeah.
like to read that. And so her premise is, very much focused on what we said about the biochemical response of pain, that a lot of it is connected to fear, and that the pain of labor is greatly, greatly reduced if, you're able to step back from that fear. And so she has like these meditations that you can listen to, these audio things. And so when I was in labor, that was actually my longest labor. Like I labored at home all night and I was awake, and that sounds awful from the outside, but actually it was really nice because it was like just me and the baby, connecting. So I'm rolling on my exercise ball or, whatever. And that was still when the contractions were only like 15 or 20 minutes apart. So yeah. And so, we got to the hospital again, probably like 5 or 6. And so we told the doctor, he was a resident. So he was younger, but like maybe even a year or two younger than me. And I was like, this sounds crazy, but we're doing this thing called hypnobirthing. And I have this audio track that I'm just going to loop. And he's like, okay. So I was grateful that he was so accepting. And, he was very interested when he came in. He's like, that does sound really soothing. Like, the, whatever I was listening to.
Yeah.
And as long as people weren't like, poking at me, checking my cervix or like checking the, the monitor and all that kind of stuff. Like I even honestly kind of zoned out a few times where I wasn't even aware of what was going on. And it was nice. But even when I was, more aware of things, my focus was on like anytime I had a contraction, if I could keep from scrunching up like that area between your eyebrows, right on your forehead, like that was what I focused on. And so that kind of gave me a focal point and allowed me to keep from tensing up and made things work a lot better.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. And then it turned out, my son was actually kind of like diagonal inside there. So his head was like tucked behind my left hip bone. And so, of course, once they told me that, I got a little nervous. That kind of broke my zen.
Yeah, of course. But, because you got afraid, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. I was like, oh gosh, are they going to do a C-section? I don't want to do a C-section, Yep. And so, fortunately, there was an experienced nurse who had been at a birthing center that's like since closed in our area, but I think she was there before. And so I looked at her and I was like, what do I do? And she said, get on your knees. Like, so I stood up onto my knees, like holding on to the back of that hospital bed, and I felt him move. Like it was the weirdest thing.
Nice.
So yeah, so I felt him move, and then just like all of a sudden I was in transition. He was out like 15 minutes later.
That's great. So it's like you had to do one little thing to kind of get him to shift a little bit. And I think this is a classic example. And I'm not trying to scare anybody right now who is pregnant with their third babies, but this happens so frequently that third baby something is up with them. Like whether it's their positioning or something weird happens during labor, or like you said, this labor was a lot longer, probably due to like kind of a malposition. But that, guys, like if you're pregnant with your third baby and you're listening to this, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to scare you, but just be aware that something might be just a little bit off. I'm not saying anything crazy is going to happen, but this is something we see, something that I have seen, a trend that I've seen all the time. Like it's just a third baby. We call it third baby syndrome. So just side note, I wanted to bring that up.
So anything you've heard about fourth babies? How does that
Fourth
go?
babies good. Fourth babies are fine. Nothing to worry about with fourth babies. Okay. It's cool. It's the third baby syndrome. I don't know. Your fourth baby will probably fly out. You'll have no issues.
I've told my husband, because I've been having like really strong Braxton Hicks.
Yeah.
Like even at 31 weeks, I had to like, do we need to go to the hospital?
Yeah.
Like it finally calmed down, but it feels a lot more like it did with my second. I've told him, I'm like, I think this is going to be a fast kid coming out.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Most likely.
But the other thing that I have said, comparing, of course, the first one, it was the epidural. So, but the second two, I had the one where I was like totally freaked out, but I made it through. And then the third one, was such an amazing experience. Because once again, recovery was great and all that. But I feel like my second birth happened to me, but like I accomplished my third birth, if that makes sense.
No, yes, absolutely. That makes total sense. And I love that. It's so empowering.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
It was really cool.
Yeah. No, that's great. And so moving, I guess, into your fourth one now, you're planning on trying to implement kind of a similar tactics and kind of similar things to your third one, or are you planning on doing anything different?
No, I mean, I might be more willing to like move around sooner if I need to. So, because I've thought to myself, like, gosh, I probably could have been done sooner, like if I'd been on my knees earlier, but of course I wouldn't have known that. So I might kind of keep that in mind if it seems like something's a little stalled out like that. But otherwise, I'm reading that hypnobirthing book again.
Yeah.
Actually, the one thing that's really nice. So the only problem with the hypnobirthing meditations is, and some people don't have a problem with it, but some people just like the woman's voice, like just gets on their nerves for whatever reason.
Oh, really?
which like, I hate saying that, but it's just like true. I've seen multiple people be like, I can't handle,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I have tried to look for birth meditations that I like. Like I've scoured the internet and looked at, iTunes and I just haven't really found one that I liked.
Yeah.
So I decided, I was like, you know what? My yoga teacher has a really soothing voice and she's just like really good at that kind of stuff. And so I just asked her, I was like, would you be willing to record some birthing meditations for me? And she said, yes, she would be delighted.
Nice.
So I know. So we've recorded, we'll have actually 3 different things. So one is called a yoga nidra, which is basically like a yogic sleep where you don't necessarily like totally go out, although you might. But like it's just kind of like a really deep meditation that is interesting because like you'll feel like you're asleep and it's about 30 minutes long or so. But then when you wake up, like you just kind of wake up at the end and you don't even realize that you've been out and you're like, wow, actually I'm really refreshed.
That's cool.
It is really cool. Like I just listened to it last night. And then she did another one that's designed like for while you're in labor. It's encouraging you to work with your contractions and to stay calm and stay mindful in the moment and all that. And then the third one I have, it's a recording of her teaching how to do something called vocal toning. So basically just holding either like vowel sounds or just like an sound, and that's really soothing. And it's a really great way, another great way to get through contractions. And so she has recorded those for me. And then I've asked her too, I'm like, what if I find a way to provide those, to the people who come to Evidence-Based Mommy? And she said she would be great. So I have 2 of them ready to go. The third one I'm planning on getting put together today, and I'm hoping to have those wrapped up soon so that other moms who are approaching labor can also benefit. Yeah.
No, I love it. And other moms who are not big fans of the hypnobirthing lady's voice, they can go to your recordings.
Right.
Well,
exactly.
I love it. Cool. Well, hopefully that will come out soon and you'll get all that stuff wrapped up and, be selling that on your site. And I'll be happy to, when all that's out, you can just send it to me and I'll add it to the show notes page for people to check it out.
Awesome.
And those sound great. Cause you've inspired me now. Like I'm going to start meditating again. I was really into meditation for so long. And then you just, I feel like it's anything, like you're really into, eating healthy and like exercising or whatever. And then it's like, you just fall off and slip off. And I haven't meditated in so long. And I'm like, gosh, you know what? I felt so good when I was doing that. And I preach this to my, patients or, my audience. I say, hey, like try meditation, especially if you're struggling with anxiety or you're just, it really helps anything. Like even if you're not struggling with anything, meditation is a great thing to incorporate in your life because it just, like you said, it just helps you stay a lot more mindful, helps you sleep a lot better. It helps you feel more awake and refreshed during the day. You've inspired me. I'm going to start meditating again.
Good.
It just it just helps your whole mindset. I love it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, awesome. well, thank you so much, Samantha, for joining me. This was a really, really great episode. We got through a lot of births.
That's true.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
Well, can you just quickly remind listeners where they can find you at your website, if you're on Instagram, any of that kind of stuff they want to follow along?
Yeah. So I am at evidencebasedmommy.com.
Yeah.
I have an Instagram. I do not get on there much, but I'm on Pinterest and I'm on Facebook more.
Cool.
So yeah. So
Cool.
both of those are at the Evidence-Based Mommy.
Evidence-Based Mommy. So everything's the same, Pinterest and Facebook and your website.
Yeah. I'll give you links so that you can show those too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll link those in the show notes page so people can, follow along. And we'll put, like I said, we'll put the meditations in there too for people who are interested in that. Cool. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great.
Are you looking for birth education? Did you know that I have 2 fabulous birth courses that are super affordable? Well, I do. Head over to mommylabornurse.com/podcast to take a short quiz to see which birth class is for you. When you purchase either birth course, you'll have full access to it forever. And that means it will never expire and you can access it throughout any stage of your pregnancy or for any subsequent pregnancies that you have. You'll also gain free access to my Facebook group, linked to the class where you can ask questions about your pregnancy, share your birth story after you give birth, read other people's birth stories, and get to know other members who are in the course. There is also a money-back guarantee, so if you are at all unsatisfied with your purchase, please send me an email at hello@mommylabornurse.com for a full refund. There's really no risk to signing up, and I promise you will learn a ton about what's to come when you give birth. As a listener of this podcast, you automatically get 20% off any purchase if you use the code PODCASTLISTENER. I've had tons of moms just like you enter these birth courses and have fabulous, wonderful, empowering births because they feel so much more educated about what's to happen. So if you are at all curious about birth education, again, I encourage you to go to mommylabornurse.com/podcast and use the code PODCASTLISTENER to save 20%. All right, so that is it for this episode of the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast. You probably follow me on Instagram because that's probably where you came from. But if you don't, head over to Instagram and follow me at mommy.labornurse for more. That is certainly where I am most active. I also now have a separate Instagram for just this podcast, so I encourage you to follow my second account at mommylabornurse.podcast as well if you want podcast updates. Again, that is at mommylabornurse.podcast. As always, you guys know that I also have a website where I have tons of articles all about pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, newborn stuff, and more at www.mommylabornurse.com. I want to hear more from you on how much you love this episode of the podcast or how you think I can improve. So leave me a comment on one of my pictures, send me a DM, or send me an email with all the love. All right, guys, I will see you same time, same place next week.